Hey everyone, welcome back to DIY with Dave. Lumber tariffs are in the news again, and in this video I'm going to explain what is going on, how did we get here, and where I think we're going. So stick around, you just might learn something. Even though Canada and the US are very close trading partners and enjoy a very cordial relationship, there is one issue that has been a thorn in the side of both countries for ages, and that is the US Canadian Softwood lumber dispute. This trade dispute dates all the way back to the 1930s when the US first placed duties on boards imported from Canada, and it continues to this day with the Commerce Department under President Joe Biden recently announcing that lumber tariffs may be increased from 9% to 18%.
There is a trade dispute brewing between the U.S. and its northern neighbor.
So what's going on and how does this affect the price of your next project? So first let's talk about what a tariff is. A tariff is a duty or a tax that is levied on a product that's being imported from one country to another. In the US, tariffs are paid by importers and are collected by Customs and Border Protection on behalf of the Commerce Department. Regardless who pays for the actual tariff though, in the end it's consumers who are really paying for it in the form of higher prices. Now, tariffs can be used as a legitimate tool by many countries and for many different reasons. For example, some countries levy a tax on all imports as a means to raise funds for the government to run. Some other countries may assess a tariff on a product that may be seen as harmful, like cigarettes. And other tariffs may be levied to protect a domestic industry from what is viewed as unfair competition. So when did the US Canadian dispute over lumber start? Well, like I said, the dispute really dates back almost 100 years, but in modern times it really heated up in the early 1980s. At that time, there were some US lumber producers who felt that Canadian lumber was being unfairly subsidized, and that cheap Canadian lumber spilling across the border was harming domestic lumber producers. The reason that US producers felt that way has to do with the differences in lumber production in the US versus lumber production in Canada. So to explain these differences, I first need to introduce a term known as stumpage. So stumpage refers to the price a company pays to a landowner for the right to harvest timber from their land. This price is set based upon the number of trees that are going to be harvested and the price per stump. In the US, a large portion of timber, around 70% of timber, comes from private land, and so lumber producers are forced to pay stumpage prices at market rates. In Canada, on the other hand, the majority of logging takes place on public or crown lands, and provincial governments are the ones who set the stumpage rates. For years, U.S. lumber producers have felt that the stumpage prices charged by those provincial governments to Canadian lumber companies was unfair because it was much lower than the market prices that U.S. lumber companies pay for their stumpage. And that difference, in their mind, amounted to an unfair subsidy to the Canadian lumber industry. So in the early 1980s, the Reagan Administration was initially neutral on the issue, as Reagan himself was a huge proponent of free trade.
My fellow Americans, there's been a great deal of talk lately about trade, some of it suggesting we should protect American companies from foreign competition. I don't believe the American people are afraid of competition. The idea is ultimately to increase trade between nations, not impede it. When you hear talk about a tough trade bill, remember that being tough on trade and commerce, the lifeblood of the economy, will have the worst possible consequences for the consumer and the American worker.
But in 1986, he caved to the pressures from lumber industry lobbyists and implemented a 35% tariff on wood shingles and shakes and a 15% tariff on softwood lumber coming in from Canada. In retaliation, Canada placed tariffs on a number of American imports to Canada, including Christmas trees, books, and computers. Throughout the mid-1980s and into the early 1990s, the two sides would continue to negotiate in an attempt to come up with a resolution that both the US and the Canadian provincial governments could accept. Each provincial government handled it a bit differently. Some provinces charged higher stumpage fees, others imposed limits on logging, and others charged taxes. But there was never a uniform agreement, and the issue remained very thorny and very complicated. Over the years, the same cycle has continued. First, the US levies a tariff, Canada disputes it, and negotiations begin. Concessions are made on both sides, and an agreement is made. That agreement expires at some point, and then the cycle repeats itself. This cycle has happened a total of 7 times since the early 1980s. The most recent lumber agreement expired in 2015. The US and Canadian governments negotiated for over a year trying to come up with a solution, but after President Trump came into office, he levied a 20% tariff on Canadian softwood lumber in 2017.
We will be putting a very big tariff on lumber, timber coming into this country. People don't realize Canada has been very rough on the United States. Everyone thinks of Canada as being wonderful, and so do I. I love Canada. But they've outsmarted our politicians for many years, and you people understand that. So we did institute a very big tariff. We announced it yesterday.
Now that 20% tariff continued until December 2020, when it was lowered down to 9%. Then this past May, the Commerce Department announced that tariffs on Canadian lumber imports would be raised to 18% pending a review process which would take a couple of months to complete. So that is where we are today. Lumber prices are still through the roof, and the country is considering adding additional lumber tariffs on Canadian lumber imports. So are these lumber tariffs a good idea? Well, the argument from the lumber industry is that tariffs are needed in order to offset unfair subsidies that are enjoyed by Canadian lumber producers. In their view, it's meant to save American industry and American jobs. But the fact of the matter is that while lumber tariffs have had some positive benefits over the years for certain individual companies, they have done by far more damage than good, especially for consumers, homeowners, and industries that consume lumber. In my opinion, they all have to go. Just like Ronald Reagan said,
I don't believe the American people are afraid of competition.
Now, this is a complicated topic, and it's political, and it's charged, and a lot of people are going to have opinions on it. And I welcome your opinions. Feel free to send me a comment. Tell me where you think I've gone wrong. Tell me where you agree. Are you Canadian? Have you been impacted by this? Are you in the US lumber industry? What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments. Now, there's also a lot more that I wanted to put into this video, but it is getting really long. And so I have a second video that I'm putting together where I'm going to be explaining really why I think that lumber tariffs are a total scam. And I'm also going to be talking about the shadowy organization that is really behind the push for lumber tariffs over the past 3 decades. So be sure to subscribe to my channel and check out that video when it comes out. Check out my other videos on DIY projects, lumber, and the lumber industry. And we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.